When you hear news about Israel and Iran, airstrikes, nuclear threats, it can seem like just another headline from a region that's always at war, always on the brink. Maybe you just scroll past it thinking it's just more of the same. But this time, it's not. The United States has just launched strikes on Iran, actions that might seem just like another military maneuver in a long history of conflict in the Middle East. But this isn't routine. It's not just another chapter. It's something much bigger, something much more dangerous. If a full-scale war erupts between Israel and Iran, especially with direct U.S. involvement, the fallout won't stay confined to that region. The economic, the political, and the security consequences would ripple outward and farther than just the Middle East. And it could hit much closer to home than most people realize. And I know they brokered some kind of ceasefire and that the hostilities seem to have ended. But if you know anything about Israel, they're not a country that really respects ceasefires. So the threat of a war in Iran is still a huge possibility. That's what we're diving into today, because this isn't just a Middle East problem. It's a global problem. And it can affect you. It can affect your wallet, your job, your daily life, and especially your security, no matter where you live. Now, I'm not here to fearmonger or throw out wild conspiracy theories. I'm here to lay out real-world consequences that the mainstream media is just not talking about. Now, let's start with the question that many people are asking right now. Why should I care? Why should I care if there's a war in Iran? And that's a fair question because you have your own problems. Rents are going up. Grocery prices cost more than ever. Life is just becoming too expensive. And the last thing anyone wants to think about is another international crisis. But wars, especially ones involving oil-rich regions and nuclear-capable states, have a way of dragging the rest of the world in. And this potential war is not just some hypothetical showdown. Tensions have already been building up for years. And with Israel and America's recent strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, followed by retaliation from Iran, things are getting dangerously close to boiling over. You know, sometimes you look at a map and you think, wow, that's a nice bit of land. But Iran's land isn't just nice, it's strategically, critically, and uniquely important. Imagine a bridge connecting two huge continents. That's Iran. On one side, you have the Middle East. On the other side, you have the rest of Asia. Think about historical roots, ancient empires, and even the modern-day geopolitical situation we're in. Iran has always been a key player. No, just because of where it's located, its location gives it immense leverage. To its west, you have the heart of the Arab world, a part of the world with a ton of energy reserves. And to the east, you have the vastness of Asia, with emerging economies like China, India, Indonesia, countries that require energy and resources. So Iran is basically in the middle, a transit point, a gatekeeper. But the real geographic kicker, the absolute showstopper, is its coastline, and more specifically, its control over the maritime choke points. We're talking about the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. If you look at a map, you'll see a relatively enclosed body of water. That's the Persian Gulf, and which narrows dramatically before opening up into the vast Indian Ocean. That narrow passage, that's called the Strait of Hormuz. And here's where it gets truly critical. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just any other strait. It's the most important oil transit choke point in the entire world. We're talking about a staggering 20% of global oil exports and a significant 26% of global LNG, or liquefied natural gas, passing through this narrow waterway every single day. Every single day. That's enormous. That's an enormous volume of energy, powering industries, heating homes, fueling transportation, essentially keeping the lights on in economies across the globe. Think about it. 1/5 of all the oil traded internationally and 1/4 of all the LNG has to navigate through this relatively small stretch of water, the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is uniquely positioned to potentially block it, and they already voted to block the Strait of Hormuz, and this is a big deal. Iran can do this because its southern coast forms the northern shore of the strait. This isn't just a matter of having a navy, it's the geographical proximity, the ability to deploy coastal defenses, naval mines, fast attack crafts, and even land-based missiles that can target ships passing through this strait. It's a strategic nightmare scenario for global energy consumers. Let me paint a picture of how serious the situation can be if the Strait of Hormuz is impacted or blocked by Iran. First, oil and gas prices, they wouldn't just go up, they would skyrocket. Imagine a sudden massive reduction in global supply of energy. And basic economics dictates that when supply shrinks, and it shrinks dramatically, and demand remains constant or even increases, prices explode. And we're not talking about a few cents per gallon or a slight bump in your energy bill. We're talking about unprecedented prices that would ripple through every sector of every economy across the globe. Every single product you buy, every service you use, all of that has an energy component. The cost of transporting goods, manufacturing products, powering factories, all of that depends on affordable energy. If oil and gas prices go through the roof, then so do the cost of everything else. Everything else goes through the roof. And this leads us directly to the next critical consequence, global inflation. Inflation is essentially a general increase in prices and a fall of purchasing value of money. If the cost of energy, a fundamental input for almost everything, suddenly doubles or triples, then businesses have no choice but to pass those increased costs onto consumers. Again, this isn't a localized problem. It's a global phenomenon. And there is this, crazy idea in the United States that since China is the biggest consumer of Iranian oil, and we have our own oil production, that we won't be affected by this. It's just a lie, because most things are, we know most things are made in China. And so if energy prices go up for the Chinese, price of manufacturing things will go up in China as well, therefore becoming more expensive for us to purchase. So it's inflation regardless. We live in a globalized world, a globalized economy. If prices go up in China, it affects everyone. If they go up in the Middle East, it affects everyone. We live in a globalized economy, and everything that happens affects us too. All right, so we just talked about how Iran's geography and its grip on oil and gas can totally mess up the world's economy. But there's another huge problem, a really human problem that nobody really talks about too much, and that's population and the nightmare scenario of a massive refugee crisis. Iran isn't some tiny country. It's a huge country. It's got over 90 million people, and a ton of those people are young. When you have a massive young population like that, it can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, yeah, it means a lot of potential for a lot of energy for the country. But on the other hand, in a conflict situation, it means they've got the manpower to fight on for a long time. So if there's a full-blown war breaking out in Iran, just picture it. We've seen places like Syria, we've seen places like Ukraine, millions of people suddenly have nowhere to go. But Iran, with nearly 90 million people, even if a small percentage of them have to flee the country, you're talking about millions of people. You're talking about millions of people having to move and leave their homes, and that will create a refugee crisis like we've never seen before. And where would they go first? Well, first they would go to their neighbors, obviously, Iraq, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia. These countries are already dealing with their own issues. They have their own challenges. How in the world could they absorb millions of desperate people overnight? Their schools, their hospitals, housing, all of that would just collapse under the weight of this instant humanitarian catastrophe on their doorsteps. But the thing is, like we've seen with the Syrian crisis and the war in Iraq, people don't just stop at the closest border. They keep on going, looking for a better economic future. And that means millions of Iranians will eventually head towards Europe. And let's be real, Europe is already having a tough time dealing with immigration already. Their politicians are arguing, their societies are divided. Europe is a mess. And now imagine millions of people suddenly showing up again, like in 2015. That will overwhelm Europe. It'll create a massive problem with integrating people, and it'll supercharge anti-immigration sentiment like we're already seeing across the continent. Obviously, you need to shelter these people. You need to feed these people. They can eventually apply to work and get jobs. But before that, they have to be fed. They have to be housed. All of that requires a ton of money and a ton of resources. I don't think Europeans are ready for this and are prepared for this. And finally, think about Iran itself. Even if the war eventually stops, losing millions of people, especially young, bright people who could build a future in Iran, it would devastate the economy. It would be like a brain drain A lot of the scientists, a lot of the engineers and young minds would have left the country, leaving it a failed state. But now let's get to what is arguably the most dangerous and the most chilling, the worst outcome imaginable when it comes to war in Iran. And that's the nuclear question. For years, even for decades, the world has been incredibly focused on Iran's nuclear program. Since the 90s, they've been saying that in a few weeks they'll have a nuclear weapon. Iran has always maintained that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, for energy, for medical use, and all of that. And the UN has inspected and admitted that there is no evidence to suggest that Iran is in the process of creating a nuclear weapon. But their actions, like enriching uranium to such high levels far beyond needed for civilian power, tells a much different story. For civilian use, you just need 3% or so of uranium enrichment. But at the moment right now, in 2025, Iran is somewhere around 60% enrichment. So that's pretty close to 90% enrichment, which is used for nuclear weapons. Now, imagine what happens if there's a full-blown war, a major conflict involving Iran. You'd think that a war would make them stop their nuclear program? If you listen to President Trump or the leadership in the United States, they claim that by striking Iran, they can neutralize their nuclear weapons program. But ironically, it could have the opposite effect. A war, especially if it feels like their survival is at stake, might only accelerate Iran's push to get a nuclear weapon. So in other words, all of this could actually just backfire. Iran might think, well, we need this as a deterrent. We need this to protect ourselves from being completely overwhelmed. We've seen Iraq get overthrown, Syria get overthrown, Libya get overthrown because they didn't have a nuclear weapon to defend themselves. And North Korea, Russia, and China, Pakistan have not been overthrown because they do have a nuclear weapon. So that is probably what's going on in the mind of Iranian leadership. But the problem is, if they do chase a nuclear weapon, even if they get very close, the game changes entirely. Now we're talking about the real risk of nuclear escalation in the region. One nuclear power attacking another nuclear power. And many countries in the region, Iran's neighbors, especially countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, or Egypt, might think that, hey, now it's our turn to get nuclear weapons. How come Iran and Israel can get away with nuclear weapons? We need nuclear weapons as well. They might then decide that they need their own nuclear weapons to balance the scales. And this could trigger a dangerous arms race across the Middle East, a region already boiling with conflicts and rivalries. A nuclear Middle East is a scenario straight out of a horror film, a nightmare. The chances of miscalculation of an accidental launch or a rogue element getting hold of a weapon, of a nuclear weapon, would skyrocket in. Now let's be clear, a direct nuclear war, even regional, is hopefully unlikely. Nobody wants that. It's the ultimate red line. They know that if they launch a nuclear weapon, they will respond by launching another nuclear weapon against them. So it's unlikely, but it's still extremely risky. The risk is real. And when we talk about Iran, it's not just about the oil prices or the refugees anymore. As devastating as that is, it's also about how this could spiral out of control and involve nuclear powers like China and Russia, Pakistan. And most alarming, it could just backfire and push Iran to accelerate their nuclear program, potentially leading to nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, escalating a regional conflict into a much larger conflict involving other major powers. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it informative, make sure to leave a like, comment below what you think, and if you want to watch more videos like this, make sure to click on this video here or this video here. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.